Alright, here we go. We're just going to talk a little bit about Hinduism today. I want to get you guys in your notes some of the major beliefs of Hinduism. And this, coupled with your reading this weekend, hopefully will get you on the right track. So a few first things that we want to talk about and some of the origins as we are looking at Hinduism are as follows. First of all, we know that there was not really one person that founded Hinduism. It really started with the Vedic beliefs or the Vedic religion based on the Vedas, and we talked about that in Unit 1. And so it kind of morphed, so it didn't have an original founder. Then we had this Vedic religion, and then that kind of turned into some Brahmanism, which is, we'll talk a little bit more about that. And eventually it's going to morph into Hinduism. And Hinduism doesn't have like one specific, like this is, everyone adheres to these single traditions by any means. It's very different depending on who we're talking to within Hinduism. And so when we look at this, it kind of morphed over time, and it's not like other religions that have a set of core beliefs and everyone agrees with those. Hinduism is a little more fluid, and there's a lot of different ways to adhere to it. So just kind of as a reminder, no founder and no single tradition of Hinduism. It may look different based on where someone lives, whether that's India or other places even today. So as we go on, a few of the key things. Like we said, Hindu beliefs, there's not one unified system of beliefs, but there are some certain terms and key things about that we want you to be familiar with. First of all, Brahman is the name of a supreme power or force. Brahman is this universal soul, if you will, this universal world soul that is the ultimate reality. It is greater than all deities, deities meaning gods, and that everything in the world is a part of Brahman. So Brahman isn't necessarily the greatest god. It is just this supreme force. If we think back to Taoism, when the Tao, the Brahman is kind of similar to that. It is this world soul, this ultimate reality. And then there's these other gods that we're going to talk about, but Brahman is behind all of that. And as we look at that, we also then can see that there's this cycle of Brahman, which is kind of the way, if you will, the way, the real reality of the world. And the cycle of Brahman is constantly creating, destroying, and recreating the universe. And we'll see this theme of rebirth and reincarnation as well, where people are born and they die and they come back again in another form. And that's like the cycle of Brahman. Remember, Brahman's not a deity or a god. It's just this ultimate world soul, this ultimate reality, the force behind everything. And so that's the cycle of Brahman. And then in us, in individuals, they would say, is a spark of Brahman in us, and that's called the Atman, the soul, if you will. And ultimately, human beings' job is ultimately to become back in unity with Brahman, and to eliminate this illusion, this perception that we have our own identities and beings, but really that we should ultimately be unified with Brahman again. And so that's some of the background based on the Vedas and kind of this kind of movement throughout these beliefs that developed into what we know of Hinduism today. Now, Hinduism today, this might be more familiar to what you've heard of before, but in Hinduism it's very polytheistic. Although they may rank, and some would say that there's one ultimate god, or Brahman is over everything, but still to this time we are going to look at these three gods in specific. There are many more, again, based on where you may live or the type of Hinduism that you adhere to. But this kind of reiterates what we were just talking about before with the cycle of Brahman, with creating, preserving, destroying, rebirth again. And so Brahma is one of the gods, is the creator god. Vishnu is the preserver, and Shiva is the destroyer. And so as we look at the world, if you are a Hindu person, you may adhere and you may honor these different gods as part of Hinduism. And again, depending on where you live, you may worship or honor other gods. that may not be listed here based on those vicinities. Now, Hinduism has a ton of literary works. Now, we are familiar with the Vedas. The Vedas, as we're coming out from the Aryan people, it's going to be eventually written down about 600 BCE. And then what we're going to see as people are going to be dissatisfied or looking for more, we're going to have some other literary works that are going to come about. And so the Upanishads are going to be some commentary on the Vedas. That people are going to look for a deeper meaning beyond what's just written in the books of the Vedas. And so the Upanishads are this commentary, and a lot of the other beliefs that we know today about Hinduism are going to come from the Upanishads, not the Vedas. Other kind of important works are the Ramayana, which is going to be this epic, this story about the duties of different relationships. We're going to see the Mahabharata, which is going to be an epic about the struggle for power between two families, like this great story, if you will. And the Bhagavad Gita, or the Gita for short, which is actually part of Mahabharata. And it's this conversation with Krishna basically about the world. And we'll come back to that at another time and maybe read an excerpt from that. But there's a lot of Hindu literary works, and anyone really can be a part of this journey. And it's not like one specific text is everything, where we're going to see that in other beliefs with the Torah or with the Bible. We're going to see that there's many within Hinduism, and depending again on your version of Hinduism, what books and literary works you really treasure. Now there's some other major beliefs, so there's lots of words kind of that are good to know and understand within Hinduism. Dharma is this law or obligation or duty. Like, to follow one's dharma means to live out and perform one's duties in life and to live in an honorable way. Now you're going to see this overlap greatly with as we looked at society, and we're understanding kind of how society works and within the caste system and the different varnas and the jati or the subcastes within this, that people are called by their religious beliefs to follow out your dharma, your duty. So if you are born into a certain class, it's your duty to live that out in a very honorable way. You shouldn't want to be in another class, because your job, your obligation, your duty is to do where you were born well. And so whether you are a priest, whether you are a farmer, whether you work with animals, or whether you work with the dead, your job is to live out and not want something else for your life except for where you were born into. That's your dharma. That's one of the key beliefs that we want to kind of keep coming back to. Karma then, and we looked at this a little bit in the last unit, is your actions or deeds. And so if you have good karma, or you're following your dharma and living out things well, then your karma will determine where you are in the class system in your next life. And so basically, when your soul or your Atman migrates from one body to another over lifetimes, will be based on the law of karma, these pure actions that are appropriate to one's station in life. And so good karma will be kind of evidenced by if you were born into a caste of kind of a higher status, and bad karma means in your last life that you weren't an awesome person. So karma is kind of your actions and your deeds. Dharma is actually living out your spot in life. So similar but different. Samsara and moksha are also really big. Samsara is this cycle of birth and death and rebirth. Almost samsara and the cycle of Brahman, if you will, are very similar. It's this cycle that we go through, and that's life. So samsara is the first bullet point. But moksha is when you are liberated or released from the cycle and no longer reborn. This is ultimately the goal, is achieving moksha. And so a lot of terms that we want to remember here, but samsara is the cycle, moksha is the release from the cycle. And then ultimately, some Hindus believe that there is power in taking a holy journey or a pilgrimage, where you're going to travel to sacred places like the Ganges River, which we're going to see people bathing there, and they believe that that's a holy adventure, if you will. And so we see that there's a lot of components to Hinduism, but ultimately living out your spot in life being very important, being honorable in all that you do. They believe that you are going to be reborn, and based on your actions in this life will determine what your life is in the next. And so we see many of these components as we look at these major terms we want you to know.
Hi, my name is John Green. You're
And
watching
you can
Crash
watch
Course World
this
History, and today we're
to
going to
sum
talk
up
about
everything.
India, which is hard.